3 is on statistical thinking. So, the role of statistics in critical thinking and ethics. To give you a little bit of a backstory, H.G. Wells, who was an early 20th century science fiction writer, you might know his work from War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. Not only was he a prolific science fiction writer, he also was a little bit of a philosopher, and he once said, "Statistical thinking will one day be as necessary for efficient citizenship as the ability to read and write." So he wasn't talking about his time. He was talking about sometime in the future, he saw that statistics was going to be very important because it was becoming more and more important in his day. So remember, statistics is all about data, all about information, and we are truly living in the information age. So being that we are in this information age, statistics can be reasonably argued that the day he was talking about is today. Well, let's back up for a moment. What is statistical thinking exactly? Statistical thinking involves applying rational thought and the science of statistics to critically assess data and inferences. So it's about critically thinking, basically. Fundamental to this thought process is that variation exists in the population data. For example, just because the average age of HCC students is reported to be 27.4 years old, that doesn't mean every student is going to be 27.4 years old. Remember the example I gave earlier, if I did a sample of 100 students, it's very possible that even though the average for the whole population might be 27.4, my sample of 100 students might only come up with 26.8 years. So we have to know how to handle and navigate through this world of uncertainty, and statistics helps us through that. One thing to consider when you're looking at a sample of data, and keep in mind, it may not even be your own sample. When someone is presenting you with data, you have to think to yourself, is this sample a good sample or is it biased? Meaning, are the results not, are the characteristics of your sample not representative of the population? There are several types of different kinds of bias, selection bias, non-response bias, and measurement error. An example of selection bias that I particularly like is, well, first off, let's define it. It results when part of the population is excluded, so those experimental units have little to no chance of being selected in the sample. A classic example is the Truman versus Dewey 1948 presidential election. So in that election, phone interviews using random digit dialing were conducted to establish which candidate voters were more likely to vote for. Okay, so the problem is that in 1948, mostly only the wealthy had home phones, and the wealthy were more likely to vote Republican. So not unsurprising, well, in hindsight, those phone interviews predicted that Dewey was going to win the election, the Republican candidate. So to compound that error, unfortunately, the Chicago Tribune posted in an early edition basing their story off of the results of this survey that Dewey defeats Truman in big letters on the front page. Of course, they were wrong because Truman actually won the election. So this was a very embarrassing, infamous, erroneous headline. Non-response bias. Non-response bias results when the researchers conducting a survey or study are unable to obtain all the experimental units selected for their sample. So this is a common problem in surveys that require participants to respond by mail, phone, or online. In other words, you might be selected to participate, but you're not filling out the survey. So this is not so unusual. Think of the last, when you go to the grocery store or drugstore or even to a fast food joint, often at the end of your receipt, it says on there, like, win $5 or $10 or enter a drawing for this, by filling out our survey online. When is the last time you actually filled out that survey? I know a few people are pretty good about always filling out those surveys, But personally, I know I've only been tempted to fill out those customer feedback surveys when I've been really, really, really satisfied, or when I've been dissatisfied with the service and I was angry and I wanted to voice my opinion. So if most people are like me, I imagine those reports are missing responses from those customers that had neutral experiences. And more specifically, it's probably more weighted heavily on those that had negative experiences, because people who have something to say that's negative, they want to get their point across. So let's go to the third type, measurement error. Measurement error refers to inaccuracies in the values of the data being recorded. There's many sources of this. In surveys, this could result from the person responding to these surveys not really knowing the exact answer. So like if somebody asks me my weight, I don't know exactly. I might be off by 5 or 10 pounds. Maybe you don't understand the question. Or maybe the phrasing of their answer could be ambiguous, or the question itself could be ambiguous. So think of all those magazine or online surveys where none of the answers seem to fit, or maybe you weren't even sure what they were asking. I know that this happens to me a lot. I might do an online survey and I understand what the question's asking, but when I look at the choices, none of them seem to work.